The memory of the world was dying. Lyra felt it as a constant, low-frequency scream in the crystalline marrow of her bones. It was the sound of 1 billion years of history being rendered into slag. The great crystal spires of Ethel, which had sung the chronicles of the stars since the galaxy was young, were silent now, their facets clouded with the greasy soot of the Vorlog processing forges, where intricate light-weaved gardens had once pulsed with the slow, thoughtful life of her people. There were now only gaping pits that belched chemical steam, the ground itself groaning as the invaders' biodrills burrowed toward the planet's core. The Vorlog hegemony had come not as conquerors, but as receivers, liquidators of an entire planet's existence. They didn't break things, they unmade them. First, they had choked the sky with atmospheric converters, turning the soft, lilac twilight of Ethel into a perpetual, rust-colored gloom. Then, their harvesters had descended, colossal biomechanical arachnids that crawled across the landscape, melting the sentient crystal forests with corrosive acid webs, sucking the liquefied history into their bloated abdomens to fuel their endless, cancerous expansion. Lyra, a weaver of the fading light, was one of the last of her kind. She was not a warrior, not a leader. Her purpose had been to commune with the heartwood, the ancient, central nexus of the forest, tending to the memories encoded within its deepest lattices. She had spent her life listening to the songs of dying stars and the whispers of nascent life from worlds 1,000 light years away, all recorded in the perfect living memory of her world. Now, the only song she heard was a symphony of annihilation. She stood on an outcropping of shimmering quartz, overlooking what remained of the grove of elders. A few dozen Ethel survivors huddled in the shadows below, their slender, crystalline forms dull and fractured, their internal light flickering like dying embers. They were all that was left of a civilization that had measured its lifespan in geologic ages. Below them, in the valley, the ground trembled with a rhythmic, sickening pulse. It was coming. The final harvester, the one they called World Breaker, was being dragged into position, its monstrous metal legs carving trenches in the earth. It was aimed directly at the Heartwood, the last repository of their shared soul. To lose the Heartwood was to cease to exist, not just in body, but in memory. To be erased from the tapestry of the universe as if they had never been. It was the ultimate violation. It is here. A low resonance vibrated from the Ethel beside her. It was Orin, his own form cracked and pitted, a once great harmonizer who could make the spires sing. Now, his voice was a broken chord. They had no weapons, not in the way the Vorlog understood them. Their defenses had been frequencies that could soothe agitated minds, light patterns that could foster growth and healing against an enemy that saw life as mere biomass. These tools were as useless as poetry against a tidal wave. Their final stand would be to simply exist, to bear witness until the acid came. Then a new sound cut through the oppressive gloom. A sound alien to both the Ethel's harmony and the Vorlog's grinding dissonance. It was a high-pitched shriek, the sound of tortured metal, followed by a concussive boom that shook the quartz beneath their feet. Lyra looked up, her multifaceted eyes straining against the toxic haze. A fire comet was streaking through the sky, trailing black smoke. Not a Vorlog vessel, but something else, something small, asymmetrical, and clearly broken. It spiraled violently, shedding pieces of its hull as it careened toward their sanctuary. It crashed less than a mile from their position, its impact sending a shockwave that cracked the very outcropping on which she stood. The forest, what little was left of it, shuddered in a chorus of pain. For a moment, there was only silence. Then the distant angry roar of Vorlog skimmers, drawn to the unexpected event. The survivors below resonated with fear, a new horror, a different kind of death. But Lyra felt something else, a flicker of something wild and unpredictable in the rigid, calculated destruction of her world, a variable. She descended the crystal slope, her movements fluid and silent. "Stay here." She pulsed to Orin. "I will see." She moved through the shattered remnants of her home, the ground littered with the crystalline dust of her fallen brethren. The air was thick with the tang of ozone and scorched metal. She found the ship wedged between two petrified crystal trunks, its hull a patchwork of mismatched plates, dented and blackened. It was ugly, brutal in its design, a thing of pure function without a hint of grace. A ramp hissed open, spitting steam into the foul air, and the first of them appeared. It was tall, bipedal, and clad in thick, scarred armor made of the same ugly material as its ship. It moved with the Predator's economy of motion, a heavy pulse rifle held at the ready. Its helmet, a dark visor with angry red optical sensors, swiveled, scanning the devastation. 3 more followed, fanning out with a discipline that spoke of countless, desperate fights. They didn't speak, communicating with sharp, clipped hand signals. Lyra remained cloaked in the shadows of a fallen spire, observing. These were not Vorlog. They lacked the biomechanical growths, the arrogant, loping gait. These creatures were tense, coiled, like cornered animals. One of them, its armor adorned with faded symbols she didn't recognize, knelt and scooped up a handful of the soil, letting the crystal dust run through its armored fingers. The leader, the first one out, finally spoke, his voice a low, gravelly rasp filtered through his helmet speakers, translated into a crude, functional version of the Galactic trade tongue. "Damn it. Jax. Scan for hostiles. Riley, get a diagnostic on the damn drive core. We need to know if we can even patch this thing. We have maybe 1 cycle before the Vorlag process this whole sector. Another figure, smaller and leaner, carrying a long-barreled rifle, climbed atop the ship's hull, its movements impossibly fluid. Got 3 skimmers inbound. Kalen, heavy cannons. They'll be on us in 10 mics." The one called Kalen slammed a fist against the ship's hull. "Of course they are. Get the damn countermeasures online. We are not ending up as reactor fuel in this God's forsaken mudball." They were trapped, just like her. Lyra made a decision. It was a desperate, illogical gamble born from the absolute certainty of her people's demise. She stepped out from the shadows. Instantly, 3 rifles snapped toward her, their targeting lasers painting her crystalline form in searing red dots. She held up her hands, showing she was unarmed. She focused her energy, projecting a single thought, not in language, but in pure, universal concept sanctuary. Kalen tilted his head. "What the hell is that?" "Some kind of local fauna. The one named Jax." A bulky figure whose armor was covered in welding tools and power conduits lowered his weapon slightly, reading high-level psionic energy. "Cap. Non-hostile. I think it's..." Talking Lyra focused again, pushing a more complex series of images and feelings into their minds. The beauty of her world before, the arrival of the Vorlog, the image of the great harvester, and the overwhelming sensation of despair. She then offered a new image, a wrecked Vorlog skimmer, one of the patrol craft that had crashed during the initial invasion, its power core still partially intact. She had felt its faint energy signature for weeks. She followed that with an image of her people, definitely, huddled and afraid. And then a final, desperate plea. Help us. Kalen remained motionless for a long moment, the red glow of his visor fixed on her. It's offering a trade, he said, his voice flat. It knows where we can find a power converter, Jax chimed in. Core's fried. Kalen, without a converter, we're never leaving this rock, and it wants us to fight a harvester for it. The sniper. Riley spoke from atop the hull, her voice calm and clipped. That's a suicide run. We're scavengers, not a damn army. Kalen didn't respond to her. He took a step toward Lyra, his rifle never wavering. He slowly reached up and removed his helmet. His face was human, she realized, a species she had only read about in the deepest archives, a young, violent race from a forgotten arm of the galaxy. His skin was pale, stretched taut over sharp cheekbones. A jagged scar ran from his temple to his jaw, and his eyes, they were the color of a dying star, ancient and filled with a weariness that seemed at odds with his apparent youth. This was a being who had seen worlds die before. We don't fight for causes, he said, his untranslated voice rougher, more human. The ship's computer rendered it a second later. We fight to survive. Your fight isn't ours. Lyra projected again. This time not a plea, but a simple, cold truth. The harvester will be here in one cycle. It will melt this grove. Your ship will be melted with it. Your survival is now our survival. A bitter, humorless smile touched Kalen's lips. He put his helmet back on, the red visor hiding his exhausted eyes. He looked at the trembling forest, at the greasy sky, and then back at the silent, crystalline figure before him. The ground pulsed again, harder this time, a deep, resonant thrum that vibrated through the soles of his boots. It was the sound of approaching doom. He hated this. He hated being backed into a corner, his fate tied to the hopeless struggle of strangers. He had spent years running from fights like this, ever since his own world had been turned to dust by an uncaring universe. But the crystal creature was right. Their clock had run out. Riley, he barked into his comms. Tell me you see a weakness on that thing. There was a pause. The harvester. It's a mobile refinery. Kalen, its armor could withstand a direct hit from our main cannon, if we had one. But its legs are powered by external plasma conduits. They run from the main body down to the articulated joints. Take out the conduits. You immobilize the leg. Take out enough leg, maybe the whole damn thing topples over. Kalen turned his gaze back to Lyra. One strike. His translated voice boomed. We help you cripple that machine long enough for it to be delayed. You show us where the power converter is. We take it, and we are gone. No heroics. No last stands. It's a business transaction. Understood. Lyra felt a surge of something she hadn't felt since the sky turned orange, a fragile, sharp sliver of hope. She lowered her arms and gave a slow, deliberate nod, the light within her form momentarily glowing brighter. She would guide them. She would lead these violent, broken creatures into the heart of the storm, and pray they were the weapon she needed, and not just another harbinger of the end. Kalen watched her, the rhythmic pulse of the approaching harvester growing louder, becoming the new heartbeat of this dying world. He turned to his crew. All right, you dogs, he growled. Gear up. Looks like we're going hunting. The alliance was forged not in trust or camaraderie, but in the cold, shared calculus of mutual desperation. On the edge of a grave, they would either escape together or share for eternity. The journey to the Worldbreaker was a pilgrimage through a graveyard. Lyra led the way, her crystalline feet making no sound on the dead earth. a silent ghost in her own desecrated home. The humans followed, a clanking, heavy-breathing counterpoint to her silence. Their presence was a violation, an invasive species of noise and iron. Yet it was a violation she had invited. She felt the world through the soles of her feet, a network of sorrow and pain. Here, the ground vibrated with the memory of a sap river, now a dry, cracked scar filled with chemical sludge. There, a patch of earth radiated a dull, agonizing ache where a grove of singing stones had been shattered and hauled away for their silica content. To Lyra, it was like walking over the exposed nerves of a dying god. The humans, for their part, saw only tactical terrain. Ridge to the left gives us a good vantage point, but it's exposed. Riley's voice crackled over Kaylin's private calm, a whisper in the oppressive silence. Valley floor is a kill zone. Stick to the fissures. Kaylin moved with a grim efficiency, his eyes constantly scanning, not for the ghosts Lyra felt, but for ambush points and structural weaknesses. He saw the world as a problem to be solved or survived. He and his kind were like cosmic grit, particles of hard matter that lodged themselves in the gears of the universe, refusing to be ground down. Lyra found the contrast both repellent and fascinating. Her people had sought to flow with the universe. These humans sought to break its grip. She guided them through a chasm carved by an ancient lava flow, its walls lined with dead power crystals that now absorbed the light rather than refracting it. It was here that Jax, the hulking engineer, paused, running a gloved hand over one of the massive, dark crystals. "The energy signatures in this place are insane," he murmured, his voice a mix of awe and a mechanic's professional curiosity. "This planet, it's like a giant, naturally occurring battery. No wonder the Vorlag want it." Kaylin didn't stop. "It's a giant, naturally occurring corpse. Jax, keep moving." They emerged from the chasm onto a high plateau, and it was there they finally saw it. The World Breaker was not a machine. It was a mobile apocalypse. It stood on 8 colossal, articulated legs, each one the size of a fallen spire, that moved with a slow, inexorable rhythm. Its body was a mountain of churning pipes, smoking vents, and glowing acid vats, a self-contained industrial hellscape. At its front, a vast maw of grinding drills and melting rays consumed the landscape, leaving behind a perfectly flat, sterile plain of glassy slag. The very air around it shimmered with waste heat and toxic fumes, and the sound it made was a soul-crushing symphony of grinding metal, hissing chemicals, and the low, deep hum of a power core that drank planetary life force. For the first time, Lyra felt the human's bravado falter. She felt a wave of pure, undiluted shock emanate from them, a feeling so potent it was almost a taste. Jax let out a low whistle that was lost in the roar. "Mother of God," he breathed. Kaylin just stared, his scarred face a mask of cold fury. He had seen hive fleets and planet killers, but this was different. This was not war. It was extermination on an industrial scale, methodical and passionless. It was the universe's uncaring logic given monstrous form. "Riley," he said, his voice tight, "you see those conduits from a high perch 1,000 yards back." Riley's voice was steady, a sliver of ice in the maelstrom. "Affirmative." Kaylin, bright blue plasma lines, running down the exterior of each primary leg joint. They're shielded, but the shielding flickers in sync with each step. There's a power cycle, a momentary drop in the field when the leg is at full extension. "A window," Kaylin muttered. "How small, less than a second. You'd have to time it perfectly." This was the plan, a desperate feat of timing and demolition. Jax had modified 4 of their ship's magnetic clamps into high-yield electromagnetic pulse charges. The idea was to get close enough to slap a charge onto the conduit during that 1-second window of vulnerability. The EMP wouldn't destroy the leg, but it would overload the plasma regulator, causing the conduit to rupture and the leg's internal hydraulics to seize, cripple 4 legs on one side, and the machine's own colossal weight it should, in theory, do the rest. Lyra's role was to get them there. Her psionic senses, which felt the world as a web of energy and life, could also feel the dead. Dissonant patterns of the Vorlog. She could sense the patrol routes of the skittering, insectoid maintenance drones that swarmed around the Harvester's feet, tiny antibodies in the service of a planetary disease. They move in waves, she projected, sending the thought directly into their minds. A feeling of rhythmic ebb and flow. There is a gap approaching. It will last for 37 heartbeats. Kaylin gave a sharp nod. All right, you heard the crystal. Jax, you're with me on the first leg. Lyra, you keep our path clear. Riley, you call out those windows and pop any drone that gets a big idea. Let's move. They descended into the chaos at the Harvester's feet. The ground trembled violently with each step the Colossus took, shaking the dust from Lyra's own fractured form. The air was scorching hot and stank of burnt ozone and melted rock. It was a landscape of pure entropy. Lyra moved like a dancer through the shifting terrain of rubble and slag, the 2 heavily armed humans struggling to keep pace. She felt the drones before she saw them, skittering swarms that moved with a hive mind intelligence, their optical sensors glowing with a malevolent red. She guided Kaylin and Jax into the shadow of a piece of metallic debris just as a wave of them passed overhead, leg at full extension. Now, Riley's voice cut through the comms. Kaylin and Jax broke cover, sprinting across the open ground toward the nearest leg, a tower of moving metal that was currently planted on the ground. The blue plasma conduit pulsed with terrifying energy. Jax ran with a heavy charge in his hands, his breathing ragged, shields dropping in 3, 2. Kaylin provided cover fire, his pulse rifle spitting bursts of white-hot energy at a drone that had spotted them, blowing it into a shower of sparks. 1, now. Jax. Now Jax lunged forward and slammed the magnetic charge onto the conduit. The shield flickered back into existence a microsecond later, trapping the device against the leg. They scrambled back to cover as the charge's indicator light blinked rapidly. Then, with a soundless flash of blue light, the charge detonated. The plasma conduit didn't explode. It ruptured, vomiting a torrent of incandescent energy. The Harvester's leg buckled with a shriek of tearing metal, its immense weight crushing the joint. The entire machine listed, its thunderous rhythm broken for the first time. A triumphant yell from Jax was cut short as alarms blared from the Harvester's body. Hatches slid open along its underbelly, and larger, more heavily armed drones dropped to the ground, their multi-barreled cannons spinning to life. They're adapting, Kaylin yelled over the din. We've got their attention. Second leg. Let's go. The next 20 minutes were a blur of calculated violence. Lyra became the eyes of the operation, her mind a map of the swirling chaos of drone patrols, while the humans became its fists. She felt a strange, detached horror as she watched them work. They moved through the battlefield with a brutal grace, their actions stripped of all emotion, save for a cold, focused intent to destroy. They were everything her people were not: violent, destructive, chaotic, and they were her only hope. They managed to plant the second charge, crippling another leg and causing the Harvester to lurch even more violently. its body now tilted at a precarious angle. But their luck was running out. As Jax moved to place the third charge, a heavily armored drone caught him in the open. A stream of plasma fire tore across the ground, and Jax cried out, his leg armor glowing red-hot as he collapsed. Kalen laid down a wall of suppressive fire, dragging his wounded crewman behind a heap of slag. "Jax, talk to me," he roared. "Legs cooked." Jax grunted, his voice strained with pain. "Armor's compromised. I can't put weight on it." The third charge lay on the ground halfway to the target leg. The drones were closing in, their relentless advance pinning them down. They were out of time. The mission was failing. It was then that Lyra did something she never thought possible. She reached out with her mind, not with a thought or an image, but with a pure, concentrated wave of despair. It was the distilled essence of her people's grief, the agony of her dying world, a psionic scream of pure loss. She focused it on the nearest cluster of drones. Their advance faltered. Their hive mind, built on cold logic and machine code, had no defense against a weaponized emotion. Their optical sensors flickered as their processing cores were flooded with a concept they could not compute the philosophical weight of total annihilation. For a precious few seconds, they were paralyzed by a simulated existential crisis. Kalen stared, momentarily stunned, as the drones froze in place. He didn't know what had just happened, but he knew an opportunity when he saw one. He grabbed the third charge himself. "Riley, cover me." He broke from cover, sprinting toward the third leg, the drones beginning to twitch back to life. He ran harder than he had in years, the screams of his own dead world echoing in his ears. He was not just running to save his ship, he was running from a ghost, the ghost of a battle he had lost long ago. He slapped the charge onto the conduit just as Riley's rifle cracked from the distance, a high-velocity round vaporizing the head of a drone that was aiming at his back. He dove back to cover as the third EMP went off. The third leg seized, and it was too much. With a groaning cataclysm of stressed metal, the world breaker lost its balance. It tilted slowly at first. Then, with gathering speed, it toppled onto its side, crashing to the earth with an impact that felt like an earthquake. A wave of superheated dust and debris washed over their position. The war for Ethel was not over, but the great harvester, the unmaking god, was silent. It lay broken, a monument to their impossible, desperate defiance. Kalen knelt beside Jax, applying a medical sealant to his leg. He looked over at Lyra, who stood shimmering in the hellish glow of the fallen machine, the light inside her form dim from the exertion. She hadn't fired a shot, but she had just saved them all. He still didn't trust her, still didn't care about her cause. But for the first time, as he looked at the fragile, determined creature of living crystal, he felt a flicker of something akin to respect. "One more charge," he grunted, nodding toward the fallen machine. "We make sure it never gets up. Then you take us to our power converter." The deal was still the deal, but something had shifted between them. In the shadow of the toppled giant, a partnership of convenience had been baptized in fire and blood, forged into something harder, sharper, and far more dangerous. The silence left by the fallen harvester was more unnerving than its roar. It was a dead, hollow quiet, filled only by the hiss of escaping steam and the groan of cooling metal. The colossus lay on its side like a beached leviathan, its great maw of drills and melting rays buried in the slag it had created. For a moment, it seemed the world itself was holding its breath. Kalen and Lyra stood on a ridge overlooking the wreckage, a tableau of crystal and scarred iron against a backdrop of industrial ruin. Jax was stabilized, propped against a rock with his damaged leg extended, his face pale but his hands already busy trying to reroute power to his armor's diagnostic systems. Riley had made her way down from her sniper's nest, her long rifle slung over her shoulder, her movements economical and wary. Like a wolf descending from the highlands, the victory felt fragile, temporary. "It's not dead," Riley stated, her voice flat as she joined them. She pointed toward the machine's fractured underbelly. "I'm seeing heat blooms and power signatures all over. Its primary core is still active. It's crippled, but the hive is still home." Kalen nodded, his eyes scanning the vast metal carcass. The deal was to cripple it. "It's crippled. We plant the last charge on the main acid vats as insurance, and we're done here. Lyra, our converter." Lyra extended a hand, and a complex, three-dimensional map of light bloomed in the air above her palm. It showed their current position and a faint, pulsing energy signature several miles away, deep within a network of canyons that had been scoured by the Vorlog's initial landing. The image was precise, a perfect representation of the energy patterns she could feel. The skimmer, she projected, its core is intact. It is sleeping. Jax let out a weary groan. Of course, it's in a damn canyon. Nothing's ever easy. "We can't carry him that far," Riley said, gesturing to Jax. "Not through that terrain, and we're exposed. The Vorlog command will know this thing is down. They'll send a response team, which is why we're not all going," Kalen said, his mind already piecing together the next desperate move. He turned to Riley. "You get Jax back to the ship. Take the high ground. Watch our backs. Use the last of the drone mines to cover your trail. Move slow. Stay hidden." Riley's jaw tightened. "And you, I'm going with her," he said, nodding at Lyra. "We get the converter. One fast, silent trip. We'll be back before dawn." It was a plan born of necessity, splitting his already tiny force, but it was the only one they had. Riley didn't argue. She understood the cold logic. She helped Jax to his feet, the big man leaning heavily on her smaller frame, hissing in pain with every movement. "Don't get yourself killed, Kalen," was all she said, her voice betraying a sliver of something more than professional concern. Kalen just grunted in response. "Try not to start a war without me." As they disappeared into the gloom, Lyra and Kalen were left alone in the shadow of the metal giant. The pairing was a study in contrasts. Kalen, all hard angles and dark, functional armor, his every movement radiating a coiled, violent energy. Lyra, a being of light and crystal, fluid and silent, her form seeming to bend the foul air around it. They moved into the canyonlands, a maze of rust-colored rock and sheer cliffs. Here, the Vorlog's destructive touch was less obvious but more insidious. The rock itself felt wrong, its natural resonance dampened, silenced. The native flora, hardy crystalline growths that could survive in the harshest conditions, were withered and black, as if poisoned from the inside out. "What are they?" Kalen's voice broke the silence, his helmet speakers making the question sound like an accusation. He was looking at one of the blackened crystal shrubs. "What do they get from doing this? It's not just harvesting, it's spite." Lyra paused, touching the dead plant with a delicate, translucent finger. An image flooded Kalen's mind, sharp and painful. He saw the shrub as it was meant to be, pulsing with a soft, internal light, humming a low, complex frequency that was part of the planet's great song. He felt its connection to every other plant, to the rock, to the sky. Then he felt the Vorlog's influence, a creeping, dissonant static that invaded the plant's essence, corrupting its song, turning its internal light to darkness, and severing its connection to the whole. It wasn't just killed, it was unplugged from existence. They do not just take, Lyra projected. The thought tinged with an ancient sorrow. They erase. They believe that any existence not their own is a flaw in the universe, a bug in the code. They are not conquerors. They are debuggers. Kalen's hand tightened on his rifle. He had fought pirates for profit, mercenaries for survival, and corporate armies for principles he no longer believed in. But this was different. This was an enemy that waged war on the very concept of other. It was a level of xenophobia so absolute it bordered on a cosmic force, like entropy or gravity. He had always seen the universe as a chaotic, uncaring place. The Vorlog sought to make it a sterile, uniform one. He wasn't sure which was worse. They found the wrecked skimmer wedged in a narrow ravine, half buried in a rock slide. It was a sleek, predatory craft, like a shard of obsidian, its hull showing signs of a massive impact. Its canopy was shattered, and the Vorlog pilot, a grotesque fusion of chitinous flesh and black metal, was slumped over the controls, long dead. The silence here was different. It felt watched. The core is in the aft compartment, Kalen muttered, more to himself than to Lyra. We need to cut through the service panel. He unslung a plasma torch from his back, its hiss as it ignited seeming deafeningly loud in the confined space. As he began to cut a circle in the skimmer's hull, Lyra's form suddenly stiffened. The light within her flickered erratically. They are here, she projected, a pulse of pure alarm. Kalen spun around, his pulse rifle raised, just as they emerged from the shadows of the ravine. They weren't drones. They were Vorlog hunters, the hegemony's elite infantry, taller and leaner than the biomechanical abominations he'd seen in archival footage. They moved with a horrifying, insectile grace. There were 4 of them, their bodies encased in segmented, black armor that seemed to drink the light. Their heads were elongated, featureless save for a single, glowing red sensor that swiveled independently of their bodies. In one hand, they carried long, serrated blades that vibrated with low hum. In the other, rifles that fired slivers of solidified darkness. There was no cover, no escape. They were caught. Before Kalen could even fire, one of the hunters blurred forward, moving faster than his eyes could track. It was on him in an instant, its humming blade arcing toward his neck. He brought his rifle up to block, the blade striking the barrel with a shriek of tortured metal and a shower of sparks that sent a jolt of kinetic energy up his arms. The force of the blow sent him stumbling back, his rifle nearly knocked from his grasp. A second hunter fired, not at him, but at the rock wall above him. The dark sliver hit the rock and exploded, not with fire, but with a concussive wave of gravitic force that ripped a chunk of the cliff face loose. Kalen dove to the side as tons of rock rained down, separating him from Lyra. He was trapped on one side of the rock slide with 2 of the hunters. Lyra was on the other side with the remaining 2. He could hear the hum of their blades, the crackle of their rifles, but he couldn't see her. He was alone. His military training, the instincts honed over 100 desperate firefights, took over. He rolled, came up firing, and squeezed the trigger. His pulse rifle spat a stream of energy at the nearest hunter. The shots hit its armor, sizzling and dissipating against a personal energy shield that shimmered into view for a fraction of a second. It didn't even slow the creature down. It lunged again, its blade a blur. Kalen dodged, the blade slicing through the air where his head had been, and kicked out, his armored boot connecting with the hunter's knee joint. The creature stumbled, its alien grace momentarily broken, and Kalen seized the opening. He reversed his grip on his rifle, using it as a club, and slammed the stock into the hunter's featureless face. The red sensor eye cracked with a sickening crunch. The creature let out a high-pitched, digital screech and fell back. The second hunter was already flanking him. He had no time to aim, no time to think. He just acted. He dropped a thermal grenade at his feet and used the hunter's own momentum against it, grabbing its arm and pulling it forward, into the blast radius. He threw himself backward as the grenade detonated, the heat and shrapnel washing over his armor. Through the ringing in his ears, he saw the hunter staggering, its armor glowing cherry red, parts of it melted and fused. He dispatched it with a single, precise shot to the chest. He scrambled over the rock slide he had created, his heart pounding. He expected to find Lyra's shattered remains. Instead, he found a scene of impossible, silent violence. The two hunters were motionless, frozen in mid-stride. Their bodies were encased in a lattice of pure, clear crystal that had seemed to grow out of the ground, trapping them like insects in amber. Lyra stood before them, her hands outstretched, the light within her form burning with an intensity that was almost painful to look at. Veins of the same crystal snaked across the ground from her feet, enveloping the Vorlog in a tomb of her own making. As he watched, the crystal pulsed once, and the hunters inside simply dissolved, their forms breaking down into a fine, gray dust that swirled within their crystalline prison. Lyra collapsed, the brilliant light within her dimming to a faint, exhausted flicker. Kalen rushed to her side. He had seen psionics before telepaths, empaths, even the occasional telekinetic, but this was something else. This was the manipulation of matter at a molecular level. She hadn't just killed them. She had unwritten their physical forms. He knelt beside her, his hand hovering uncertainly over her shoulder. For the first time, he realized he wasn't traveling with a guide. He was traveling with a weapon whose nature and power he couldn't possibly comprehend. How? He began, but the word died in his throat. The world is memory. Lyra projected, her thought weak, exhausted. All things that are, were. All things have a pattern, a song. The Vorlog, they are dissonance, a wrong note. I did not destroy them. I simply corrected the composition. She had turned their very existence into a lie, and the universe, through her, had erased it. Kalen stared at the crystal statues, at the dust swirling within. He had come to this dead world looking for a spare part to save his own skin. Now he found himself at the epicenter of a war between two forces that operated on a level he was only beginning to grasp. One was a force of absolute, sterile order. The other was a force of living, breathing memory. And he, a violent, broken scavenger from a forgotten corner of the galaxy, was standing right in the middle. He looked from the crystal tombs to the plasma torch lying on the ground. "Get up," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "We still have a converter to steal." The mission had not changed, but everything else had. The fate of his ship was no longer the only thing at stake. Now, he was fighting for a concept he had long ago dismissed as a luxury for the dying, a memory worth saving. The journey back to the human ship, the Vagrant, was a tense, silent affair. Kalen half carried, half supported Lyra, whose internal light remained a pale, sickly flicker. Her exertion in the canyon had drained her, leaving her crystalline form looking fragile and brittle, as if a sharp blow might shatter her into a million pieces. He, in turn, was running on little more than adrenaline and grim determination. the converter core clutched in his free hand like a holy relic. It was heavier than it looked, its dense casing radiating a faint, residual power that felt like a promise of escape. They moved through the pre-dawn gloom, the rust-colored sky beginning to lighten into a bruised purple. The world felt different now. Before, Kalen had seen Ethel as a casualty, another nameless victim in the universe's endless, grinding war of attrition. Now, after what he had seen Lyra do, he felt the planet's silent agony as a palpable presence. It was in the way the wind whispered through the dead crystal groves, in the oppressive silence of the poisoned earth. He felt as though he was walking through a mind that was being systematically lobotomized, its memories scraped away layer by layer. Lyra's words echoed in his thoughts. I corrected the composition. It was the calm, measured statement of a god, and it terrified him more than any Vorlog hunter. When they finally broke through the last ridge and saw the vagrant nestled in its makeshift camouflage of rock and shadow, a wave of relief washed over him so potent it almost buckled his knees. Riley was perched on a high rock, her rifle a long, dark line against the brightening sky. She gave a sharp, single whistle, the all-clear signal, before gracefully making her way down to meet them. You look like hell, Kalen, she said, her eyes taking in his battered armor, the heavy converter, and the exhausted, shimmering form of Lyra. I take it you found what you were looking for. And then some. He grunted, handing her the converter. Get this to Jax. Tell him to start the integration immediately. I don't want to be on this rock a second longer than we have to be. Inside the cramped, utilitarian confines of the ship, the air hummed with a renewed sense of purpose. Jax, his leg now encased in a sputtering, jury-rigged medical brace, took the converter with the reverence of a priest receiving a sacred artifact. His fingers, stained with grease and grime, danced across its surface, prying open access panels and connecting diagnostic leads. The matrix is compatible, he muttered, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. It's an older model, but the energy regulation is. It's beautiful, clean, efficient. Whoever built this thing knew what they were doing. While Jax worked, his voice a constant, low murmur of technical jargon and curses, Kalen gently helped Lyra to a spot in the small med bay. She didn't sit, but rather leaned against the bulkhead, her form so still she could have been mistaken for a statue. He had fought alongside aliens of a dozen different species, but he had never felt so utterly out of his depth. He didn't know how to help her. Did she need water energy? Did she sleep? You need to rest, he said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. Rest is a cessation, she projected, her thoughts still weak but clear. My energy is woven into this world. While it suffers, I cannot be whole. Your machine, it will allow you to leave. That's the plan, he said, pulling off his helmet and running a hand through his sweat-matted hair. The scar on his face stood out starkly in the ship's dim lighting. Jax says it'll take a few hours to splice the core into our systems. We'll be powered up and gone before the Vorlog figure out where we are. Lyra was silent for a long moment. He could feel her psionic presence gently probing the ship, feeling the thrum of its life support, the frantic energy of Jax's work, the quiet, watchful tension of Riley in the cockpit. Then, she projected an image into his mind. It was the Heartwood. He saw it not as a physical place, but as a nexus of living light, a great, crystalline lattice that pulsed with the accumulated knowledge of 1 billion years. He saw memories of star births and galactic migrations, of civilizations rising and falling, of concepts and philosophies so alien They made his head spin. He saw the soul of Ethel. Then he saw the Vorlog. He saw their biodrills, monstrous, corkscrewing engines of annihilation, burrowing through the planet's crust. Their target, the Heartwood. He felt the grinding, relentless pressure, the slow, agonizing destruction of memory, the uncreation of 1 billion years of existence. And he understood. Leaving wasn't enough. Not for her. They will not stop. Lyra projected, her thought now imbued with a cold, desperate certainty. They will find the Heartwood. And when they do, my world, my people, will cease to have ever been. We will not be a memory. We will be an error, corrected and deleted. Kalen slammed his fist against the metal wall, the impact echoing through the small ship. That's not my fight, I told you. We had a deal. We crippled the harvester. You gave us the converter. The deal is done. The deal was for your survival. She replied, You are not yet safe. The Vorlog know of your existence now. They know your technology is not of this sector. They will not allow a loose variable to escape. They will hunt you. They will find your home. The word home hit him like a physical blow. He had no home. It had been glassed by a corporate fleet a decade ago, a casualty in a resource war he had been fighting on the other side of the sector. He was a refugee, a scavenger, a ghost haunting the wreckage of his own past. He had built his life on the principle of non-attachment, of never fighting for a piece of ground you weren't willing to abandon at a moment's notice. They can try, he snarled. The old, familiar anger, a welcome shield against the deeper, more complicated emotions she was stirring in him. But Lyra wasn't finished. She pushed another image into his mind. It was a memory, but it wasn't her own. It was his. He saw a flash of a green sky, of gleaming silver towers, of a woman's face, laughing. He felt the warmth of a sun he hadn't felt in a decade, smelled the air of a world that was now nothing but radioactive dust. He felt the searing, gut-wrenching pain of loss, a pain he had buried under layers of cynicism and scar tissue. You know what it is to be erased, she projected, her thought not an accusation, but a statement of shared experience. You fight to survive, but what is survival? Kalen, without a memory of what you were, you are a ghost because your past was stolen. Do not let them make ghosts of us all. He recoiled from her, stumbling back, his breath catching in his throat. She had reached into his mind and pulled out the one thing he could never run from. She had seen the wound that had defined his entire existence. For years, he had told himself he fought for survival. But she was right. It was a lie. He fought because it was all he had left. He was a weapon without a war, a soldier whose nation was a crater. The rage drained out of him, replaced by a profound, hollow emptiness. He looked at this strange, crystalline being, a creature of light and memory, and he saw a reflection of his own loss. She was fighting for her home. He was a man who had forgotten what that word even meant. Kalen, we have a problem. Riley's voice, sharp and urgent, cut through the tension. He strode to the cockpit, Lyra following silently behind him. On the main view screen, a tactical display showed their position. It also showed a dozen new contacts, appearing at the edge of the planet's gravity well. They weren't the small, fast skimmers of a response team. The energy signatures were massive. A blockade fleet, Riley said, her voice grim. They've quarantined the planet. Nothing gets in or out. Jax's voice crackled over the comm from the engine room. The converter's integrated. Kalen, but I haven't even had time to run a full diagnostic. If we try to punch through that, our shields will last about 30 seconds. We're trapped. Kalen stared at the screen, at the closing jaws of the Vorlog trap. Lyra's words echoed in his ears. "You are not yet safe." She had been right. Their fates were still intertwined. He could not run. He could not hide. The Vorlog had made it personal. He looked at Lyra, her faint light reflecting in the polished metal of the cockpit. Then he looked back at the tactical display, at the symbols for the enemy fleet, and at the blinking icon that represented the dying heart of Ethel. A cold, hard resolve began to crystallize within him, a feeling he hadn't felt since before his world had burned. It was the feeling of a man who had finally found a war worth fighting. "Riley," he said, his voice quiet, steady, and dangerously calm. "Bring up the planetary schematics. Lyra, show me where those drills are. Jax, I want to know exactly how much power you can squeeze out of that new core." Jax's confused voice came over the comm. "Squeeze out for what? A run?" "No," Kalen said, a wolfish, feral grin spreading across his face for the first time. "For a fight." He was done running from ghosts. It was time to start making some. The Vagrant was not a warship, but its captain had just declared war on an empire, and his first act would be to defend the very soul of the world he had been so desperate to flee. The planning session was not held around a holographic table, but in the cramped, grease-stained cockpit of the Vagrant. It was a council of the desperate, put by the angry red glow of the tactical display. Aurelian laid out the plan, his voice a low, steady rumble that cut through the ship's anxious hum. He pointed not at the blockade fleet in orbit, but at a massive, centralized power signature deep within the planet's crust. The point where the feeds for all the bio-drills converged into a single, massive control nexus. "We're not going to fight the fleet," he said, his words dropping like stones into the silence. "And we're not going to fight the drills. We're going to turn the drills into a weapon that will take out the fleet for us." Jax, leaning against the engine room doorway, his face slick with sweat, just stared. "You're insane. That nexus is tied directly into the planet's geothermal core. The amount of energy flowing through it it's not measurable. If we so much as tickle it with our systems, the feedback will vaporize this ship. We're not going to tickle it." "Jax, we're going to open the floodgates," Kalen countered. He turned his gaze to Lyra, who stood silently beside him. "You said this world is a battery, a memory. The Vorlag are drawing power from it to erase it. We're going to help them. We're going to give them all the power they can handle, all at once." The concept settled over the crew. It was a plan of audacious, suicidal genius. They would fly the Vagrant to the surface coordinates of the control nexus. Jax would have to find a way to hack their modified power core directly into the Vorlog's energy grid. Then, Lyra would act as a conduit, a psionic key to unlock the deepest reservoirs of Ethel's life force and funnel it directly into the Vorlog's machine. They would overload the entire system, creating a catastrophic, planet-wide energy cascade. The resulting surge, Riley breathed, her tactical mind seeing the horrifying implications. It wouldn't just destroy the drills. It would erupt outward, a shockwave of pure energy. It might be enough to disrupt the fleet's shields and communications, create a window. "Might," Kalen affirmed, his eyes hard. "It also might be enough to crack the planet's crust and kill us all. But it's the only plan where we don't die waiting in a cage." He looked at each of them, his crew, his broken, mismatched family of survivors. This is not a scavenger run. This is a one-way ticket. Anyone who wants out can take a life pod now. No questions asked. No one moved. Jax just shook his head and limped back toward the engine room, muttering about flux capacitors and impossible energy differentials. Riley turned back to the helm, her hands flying across the controls as she began plotting a flight path through the densest of the Vorlog's surface-to-air defenses. Their answer was in their actions. Lyra's thought touched his mind, a feeling of quiet, profound gratitude that was more potent than any words. You were a warrior once, Kaelin, for a world you remember. That world is gone, he thought back. The old pain, a familiar ache. This one is not. Not yet. The flight of the vagrant was a desperate, screaming dive into the mouth of hell. As soon as they broke cloud cover, the Vorleg defenses lit up. Towers of black, crystalline alloy, seeded across the landscape, fired bolts of coherent darkness that chewed through the ship's shields like acid. Skimmer patrols, alerted to their presence, swarmed them like angry hornets. Shields at 40%, Riley called out, her knuckles white as she threw the ship into a gut-wrenching corkscrew maneuver, skimming the canyon walls so closely that Kaelin could see the striations in the rock. Weapons are overheating. I can't hold them all off, Jax. I need more power to the aft shields, Kaelin roared into the comm. If I give you any more power, the inertial dampeners will fail and will be turned into a protein shake, Jax yelled back, his voice strained over a cacophony of alarms. Buy me 2 more minutes. I'm almost in, through the viewport. Kaelin saw their target, a vast, circular fortress of pulsating black metal, built into a crater of its own making. It was the nerve center of the planetary lobotomy, the source of the dissonant hum that had become the planet's death rattle. It was surrounded by a perimeter of automated plasma cannons that were now swiveling to aim at their descending ship. Now, Riley straight down. Riley didn't hesitate. She pushed the nose of the vagrant down, accelerating directly toward the fortress. For a terrifying moment, it seemed they were on a suicide run, intent on crashing directly into the structure. But it was a feint. At the last possible second, she pulled up, the ship groaning in protest, and skimmed low over the fortress roof. It's the only way to get a clean signal lock, Jack screamed. Hold it steady. Plasma fire erupted around them, scoring deep, glowing gouges in the vagrant's hull. An explosion rocked the ship, and the lights flickered and died, plunging them into the red glow of the emergency backup system. I'm in Jax's triumphant voice cut through the chaos. I have a hard link to their primary energy conduit. It's beautiful and terrifying. Kaelin, the door is open. This was it. The moment of truth. Kaelin turned to Lyra. Her body was glowing now, not with a faint flicker, but with a blinding, pure white light that filled the cockpit, washing out the red of the alarms. She had her eyes closed, her hands pressed against the cold metal of the bulkhead, but he knew she was seeing everything. She was connected to the ship, and through the ship, to the wounded heart of her world. Do it, Lyra, he whispered. She didn't need the encouragement. He felt the shift in the ship before he saw it. The low hum of the engines rose in pitch, becoming a clear, resonant note. Wave of psionic energy, unbelievably powerful, surged from Lyra through the ship's systems, amplified 1,000-fold by the alien converter core, and down the data link into the Vorlog Nexus. It was not an attack. It was a song. It was the song of Ethel. It was the memory of its molten birth, the slow, patient growth of its first crystals, the first touch of life in its primordial oceans, the rise of the Ethel people, their thoughts and dreams and histories woven into the very fabric of the planet. It was 1 billion years of existence, of life and light and consciousness, compressed into a single, overwhelming psionic broadcast. For the Vorlog's cold, logical system, it was the ultimate virus, a wave of pure, unquantifiable meaning. The fortress below them did not explode. It began to resonate, to vibrate in sympathy with the song. The black, dead metal shimmered, and then, impossibly, it began to change. Crystalline structures, intricate and beautiful, began to grow from its surface, branching out like frost on a windowpane. The dissonant hum of the drills faltered, replaced by a rising, harmonic chord. Deep beneath the earth, the great biodrills shuddered to a halt. The unmaking engine, force-fed the entirety of the history it was trying to erase, suffered a catastrophic, philosophical failure. The power it was drawing from the planet, now guided by Lyra's song, reversed its flow. The drills didn't just overload, they began to crystallize from the inside out, turned into monuments of the very life they had been built to destroy. The energy cascade erupted from the nexus, not as a wave of fire, but as a wave of pure light, a silent, expanding sphere of creation that raced toward the sky. "It's working," Riley said, her voice filled with awe. In orbit, the Vorlog blockade fleet was caught completely by surprise. The wave of psionic light washed over them, and for their networked, hive-mind consciousness, it was like a dagger of pure sunlight into a vampire's heart. Their systems didn't short out. They were flooded with alien concepts they were not designed to process: grief, hope, beauty, memory. Ships drifted, their command structures paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming complexity of life. Their perfect, sterile order was shattered by a symphony. "Our window," Kalen breathed, snapping out of his trance. "Get us out of here." Riley, now the vagrant, battered and bleeding atmosphere from a dozen wounds, tore itself away from the crystallizing fortress and clawed its way toward the sky. They punched through the atmosphere, a tiny, scarred ship racing past the drifting, confused behemoths of the Vorlog fleet. No one fired on them. They were an irrelevant detail in a system that had just suffered a complete collapse of its fundamental operating principles. They made it to the jump point, and with a final, shuddering lurch, the stars outside the viewport elongated into surreos of light, and they were gone. Silence descended in the cockpit, broken only by the weary sigh of the life support and the faint, triumphant hum of their new power core. Jax was unconscious, slumped over his console in the engine room, a small, victorious smile on his grimy face. Riley leaned her head against the back of her pilot's chair, her eyes closed, her hands still trembling slightly. Kalen walked over to Lyra. The blinding light had receded, leaving her with a soft, steady internal glow that was brighter and healthier than he had ever seen. She looked tired, but whole. "It is not over," she projected, her thought calm and clear. "But it is a beginning. The song has been heard again." She showed him one last image. It was Ethel, seen from space. The ugly, rust-colored haze was beginning to dissipate. The vast, sterile plains of slag left by the harvesters were no longer dead. From the crystallized heart of the drill nexus, a faint, blue light was spreading, a network of energy that was slowly, patiently beginning to reconnect the severed nerves of the world. It was a scar, a terrible wound, but it was no longer a fatal one. Kalen looked out at the endless starfield ahead. He was still a man without a home, a scavenger in a broken ship. But something inside him had been reconnected as well. He was no longer just a survivor, a ghost haunted by a dead world. He was a keeper of a memory, a carrier of a song. He had looked into the abyss of total annihilation and helped a dying world sing its defiance. He didn't know where they were going next, but for the first time in a long, long time, he felt like he was flying towards something rather than just running away. And in the quiet hum of the ship, he could almost hear the faint, distant echo of a world beginning to heal.